This is an overview of the console part 2. We're going to talk about two main things in this video. One is the auxiliary outputs, or in some consoles we'll call them mix outputs. And we'll also talk about the matrix outputs, which are two different ways to get audio out of the board for different purposes, and they have really practical purposes for how we're doing things at Harvest West Olive. So let's first talk about actual auxiliary output. Now, if you remember, we have on the console the most primary output that we tend to think of as the audio that comes out of the main speakers. So in this case, we call this our main left-right out bus, and that is a typical output that sends it to our amplifiers and to our loudspeakers. So then you have other ways that you send audio out of the console, and one of them is through what's typically called auxiliary outputs. These are just like faucets in your house after the main water has come in, different places where audio can go. And so in our particular setting, we're using primarily for mixes that we are doing for in-ears. As you know, some of our vocalists were actually sending them monitor mixes through the console that they can actually control through an iPad themselves. This may not always be the way that we do it, but it's the current way that we're doing it for sopranos, altos, the worship leader 2 position. So the way that we're sending a mix for them is through the aux outputs. And the way on this board that you mix to an aux output is no longer like we used to do, where if you remember on the M7 upper right corner, you'd have a send to faders. And when you would click on that and then choose what you want to use the faders to send to, you would have different options to send it to. In this case, the DLive doesn't handle it that way. They handle it through the use of the mix buttons on each channel. And the mix buttons will do different things depending on what the channel is. But in the setting of sending a monitor mix for the in-ear monitors, the wireless in-ear monitors on stage, you would simply go to in your output section, and this is currently on the F layer of Bank 2. This is the soprano IEM. So we hit mix, and now we can see through the different banks, we can see exactly what's sending to that. So these faders right now are actually sending output to the auxiliary output, which goes backstage and feeds the wireless transmitters, which then in turn are picked up on the belt packs for the actual in-ear monitors for the singers. So as we talked about in the first lesson, when anytime you have the mix button assigned to something other than the main speakers, you know that you are not mixing now for the main speakers. And so the danger in digital mixing and layers is that you would go to another layer somehow, lose your mix button, and forget where you are. And again, that's why we created this little cheat soft key over here, number 10, which is basically reassigning the mix to the left-right. So that's always kind of a home base that you can get to. As well, you can do that with the home button in the upper left-hand corner. The home button deselects any channel that's selected and taking over the screens, and it also resets your menu layer views screens, and it also reassigns the mix bus to the mix setting to the left-right bus. So that's two ways you can get back to that when we talk about mixing to left-right speakers. But let's go back to vocals. We're in our layer F. We're going to select up the soprano. And now this is how we can push things too. You can see what things, we've got the worship leader mics, the soprano mic obviously, tenor mic, vocals, and then we'll have parts of the band at a slightly lower level. So that's how we send. So you can manually adjust their mix for them, or they can do it through the network on their iPad. So that's how we use these mix buttons to send things. Essentially we're doing send to faders like we used to know. The other way that we use send to faders is through our the other outputs, like let's say the butt kickers, right? So for the drum, and for those of you who don't know, we're not being crass, but the butt kickers are a specific driver that is attached to the actual drum seat. And in the bass player's position, it's a driver that's actually attached to a platform that they stand on. And this allows us to couple their in-ear mix with some actual mechanical energy that they can feel in their body, because most of our low frequencies that we perceive, we actually perceive them through our bodies, not just our ears. And so we're supplementing some of the low end for them. So when we're wanting to mix to the butt kickers on the drum or bass, we do the same thing. We just hit the mix button for that aux master. That's what these are. These are aux masters. And you can take the overall level to it completely down right here, but typically you would leave them up and just mix to it. So now that we have the butt kicker drum channel mixed, and if we go to the layers, we're going to see that we're sending kick drum to it, and we're sending bass to it, the two primary things that we would send to it. And we're also sending some of the left-right mix to it, just to give an overall anything else that's low, like synths and things like that. It's kind of a catch-all. So that's how we mix to the butt kickers. And then we would also mix to, we have a flex channel that we've created to send a bunch of things on an easy input that everybody can find on their personal mixers. And in the flex channel, we've put the baptism mic, the headset mic, the MC mic. We've got some of the computer in there, so when there's video rolls off the computer, you guys can hear it. And then we have some of the main bus in there as well. We're going to now go to another way that we use aux sends, but I'm going to talk about this more in depth in another video, and that is the effects. And in the effects, this is done a little bit differently than before as well in the console. We have effects returns, and these are actually just channel inputs that take the total amount of the effects based on what instruments have sent to them, and then we add that to our mix. So this is where you mix the overall amount of reverb and delay hitting your mix, right? But that's after we've already sent to the effects, and the way we do that is by using these aux sends. And so if you want to mix the vocal reverb, you're going to hit the mix button right here, and now you'll see things that are sending to the reverb, like Worship Leader 1 on this layer. Let's go back to our vocal layer. You'll see things like all the vocals basically, and none of the band. And we have some redundant custom channels in here that people have used already. Yeah, so that's primarily what we're sending to it. And so that's how we get it into the Vox Reverb. And this should actually be up at 0. So we usually don't move these, although this would be one way to kill everything going to it. Another way would be to kill everything coming out of it through the return. So those are some like kind of emergency ways to stop effects. But typically we want to leave these set, mixed to taste with the returns, and then assign what we're sending to them in varying degrees. So that's how we mix effects. Lots more on that in another video. So that's aux sends. So that we're talking about outputs in this video. That's the way that we're getting output to things like monitoring, these butt kickers, our effects returns. So now what we're going to do is talk about matrix outputs. Matrix outputs are different. They're more like the way that the main speakers receive audio from the output. They're similar to that. So in this sense, we have our matrix outputs on the last layer, F of bank 2. And we'll have right here, we have 3 primary ways that we're sending audio out. The MP3 recorder for recording the service, the video master output for sending to our video record decks, and then also the lobby speakers. So let's talk about how we've found these in the first place. We can go to our Surface and go to Control. This is how we initially set up these, so you can kind of see from start to finish where they come from. These are all the things that we have, the inputs and outputs and mixes that we have that we can assign to any fader on the board. So right now we're in the control of the Surface, we're in the Control tab, now we're in Strip Assign, so channel strips, we're assigning things to those channel strips, and we come down here to Mixes. Any output is called a mix on this board, and now we see that we've set up 4 mono mixes and 3 stereo mixes. And so we have right here, let's talk about the MP3 recorder. We initially drug that mix output into this last bank layer F, and you can see it's already here. So that's where it came from in the first place. And then if we select the output, let's talk about the MP3 recorder first. If we select the MP3 recorder, and then we go to the routing tab, we see the things that are now feeding this matrix. Here's a very fast way to get through all of the inputs or mixes or whatever. And the type of thing you're looking for is up here. So first of all, to the MP3 recorder, we really just want to send the main left and right. Everything we're sending to the board, we just want to send the same proportion of that to the recorder. So the way to assign that to this matrix, which again is selected, is to go to the Mixes tab here in Routing, and to go find that mix, the main mix. So we're going to use this quick slider to get all the way to the end. There's our left-right main output. So what we're going to do is I've done some tests to set good gain structure, and I found that it seems like a healthiest level to send about minus 5.4 dB, right? The way you control the output of that is by clicking on that and then using your universal encoder here to say how much you want to send. So we found that to be a pretty good place, right? So we're sending the only other thing that we want to send to make our MP3 recordings, which is basically just our sermon audio that we put on the podcast. The other thing we want to add that's not currently going in the left, right, and main mix bus is the house mic, because we're not putting that in our sound system. We're only using that for recording purposes. So we're going to go to the inputs now, and we're going to go find our house mic, which is you got to kind of memorize where it's at. It's a ways in here. We're going from basically the top of the board to the bottom. Eventually we're going to come, oh, there it is, house mic left. And right now we're not using the house mic right due to a challenge, but eventually you'll have both of these sending when we get it up and running. So right now we select house left, and now we can use our encoder to say how much we're sending to. And right now we're finding that about minus 18 dB is good. That may change by the time that you get your hands on the console, and whatever you see there is a starting point for you to mix to taste. So that's now how we are sending to this mono matrix bus. This is a mono matrix, so it's only one output, so you don't have pan options in here like you'll see in some of the next matrices outputs that we're going to talk about. So this is what's going to the MP3 recorder. Okay, so now let's talk about the video deck. These are three really important matrix outputs to have working well. We're going to talk about the video right now. And the video output is a stereo output because we're sending to a left and right input on the video record gear, right? So let's talk about, we're going to enable this output in the same way we're still in our routing tab. And so what we're going to do is we've got a couple of things going on. We're sending a board mix to the left output, which then goes into the left input of the video record decks. That's going to be just basically the main mix bus. So the way to verify that we're doing that is to go up here to the Mixes tab and to take our slider here all the way to the right where the left-right mix bus is, and you'll see two things going on. One, you'll see the level that we're sending. In this case, we're sending 0 dB. And then what we're doing is if you click on the left and right, you'll see right above it the left and right pan assignment. Then now you can change that with your encoder. And we're going to go all the way left because the left output corresponds to the left input of the video deck, which is just board mix. And the reason we're doing this is because in post-production we want to be able to mix the board mix and the room mic separately, and that's what I do in the video post-production. So we're not sending an actual stereo mix to it, we're just sending two channels to it. So all left and right bus, all in the left channel, sending out. And then the other input, just like before with the MP3 recorder, we're sending house left and eventually house right as well. I have assigned this to pre-fader so that if for some reason somebody accidentally pulls the fader down on the house mic, which is not assigned to the main mix by the way, but if someone accidentally mutes it or pulls the fader down, I'll know that it's not getting interrupted signal to the video decks. So I've sent a little bit more level on this one, about 7 dB, and I've panned all the way right. You gotta click above it there. And when you know that you have selected something to change, you see the little orange LED light up on the encoder. And I've panned all the way right. So now we're sending only house left to the right channel, to the right output of the stereo matrix, which is feeding the right input of the video deck. Okay. And the last thing, which is much more like the MP3 recorder, is a stereo matrix output called lobby. And what we're sending to the lobby, as you'll see, is again a combination of house mic, but less than the video deck, because this is an actual mix now that's going to the lobby. So I don't want it to be, the house mic to be louder than the actual board mix. So I'm sending on here, it looks like, let's see, where are we at? About minus 15 dB, about 12 o'clock on the dial. And I'm just sending it straight to the left and right bus. And then we're also, through the mixes portion, we're sending a lot of the left-right bus, and also just pan to center left and right. So truly we could do this mix on a mono matrix, but for some reason we just set it up initially as a stereo matrix. So there's not as much thinking to that as you'd imagine. But so we're sending about 1.6 dB output, and we're leaving it just left and right main, so that it's essentially mono. So that's hitting, if you want to know what happens beyond this output, what happens is this mono line goes backstage to the amp racks, and it is then split parallel into two inputs of an amplifier back there. One input and output goes to the bathroom system, and then the other goes into the actual lobby speaker system and feeds the lobby speakers. So those are three matrix outputs that we're going that you'd want to know about. I'm going to back up just to remember one thing at the end of this video. One other mix output that I forgot to talk about, it's kind of important, is the subs. So we're going to get out of our routing view, and if we use the mix button now on our subs, this is our main sub aux output. again, here's the mix button for the sub output. And what we're going to do is send to faders now with the things that we're sending to it. So you can see we've got kick drum, floor toms, bass guitar, some of the synth and keys. We're sending pretty low levels, and we have to be really careful that we don't send so much to the subs that we neglect to send low frequency content to the main mix, because the main mix is what we're sending to the video recording, the lobby, things like that. So the more you send to the subs, less you're sending to the main mix. So we want to let our main speakers do some of the lifting of low frequencies and then use the subs to complement. If that doesn't make sense, find me and I can give you more input about that. Okay, so that's an overview number 2 on the console that really just talks about outputs. And again, we'll be talking about effects, which we briefly mentioned in another video.